listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
All right, people. You may have heard me say this a few times before, or maybe more than a few times before on episodes past, but here's the deal. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are engaging in something they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. If you'd like to schedule an introductory coaching session with me, you can do so through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I offer compassionate, confidential coaching via Zoom. So that means we can work together no matter where you're located. Okay, if everything works out the way I think it's going to, this episode will be released right as 2021 is coming to an end. And personally, I think any time of the year is just as good as any other for taking stock of the past and clarifying our vision for the future. But since the changing of the calendar year is a meaningful transition for a lot of people, I am going to use this episode as an opportunity to talk about change and how we can approach the process of change. And today I'm going to talk about this in really general terms. This will absolutely apply to you if you are contending with any kind of an infidelity situation or any other relationship challenge situation. But this also applies to to change in other domains of your life. The first thing I want to suggest is that the way many of us approach change isn't terribly helpful. And number one, I want you to know that that was certainly true for me for many years of my life. And number two, this isn't all that surprising because most of us don't ever learn best practices for approaching change, or perhaps we don't learn any practices which might even be remotely helpful for approaching change. We just do it, or we try to just do it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And then since we don't have a great understanding of how change works and how to better initiate change, we don't know how to usefully interpret the results of our past efforts to make changes. And this can get us into a lot of trouble because if we've tried to make changes in the past and we haven't succeeded, or we don't think we've succeeded, we may make this mean that there's something wrong with us or that we aren't capable of making certain kinds of changes. Or maybe we make it mean that change isn't possible for us at all. Wow. And then when we believe that these kinds of things are true or might be true, these beliefs influence our behavior. And then we may create more evidence for ourselves that we can't make certain changes, or that we're deficient in some way, or that we are subject to constraints that we can't control. And without going into a whole lot more detail, these kinds of patterns of thinking, these kinds of patterns of perceiving our experiences are incredibly common. And they can have a really big impact on people's lives. I know they had a really big impact on my life for a long time. And I see this in my clients all the time too. So what I want to suggest we think about at this time of year when a lot of people are, trying to figure out what they're going to do in the next year or make their New Year's resolutions or set goals or whatever it is that we ask the question of how we can approach change in a way that actually works for us, in a way that helps us get what we want. And although this is such a vast topic, I mean, the topic of change and how do we facilitate change is broad and deep, but I am going to list or share, I should say, a few specific pieces of guidance with you today. And the first thing I want to suggest is this. You have the opportunity to get really, really clear on the changes you want to make. What specifically do you want? the more precise you can get about what you want, the better. Because when our desires are vague, our results are usually vague too. And this, for a lot of people, is a major challenge in and of itself. So often we're in a situation where we know we really want change. We know we really want things to be different from the way they currently are. But although we may know what we don't want, we aren't all that clear on what we do want. And to make things even more challenging, so many of us don't believe that it's okay or possible for us to want anything, period, or for us to want anything that might be different from what other people want. So many of us don't know how to give ourselves permission to want things, in other words. And if that's where you are, I want you to know that that's okay. And if this is where you are, this is your work. Getting clear on what you want and believing that you can have what you want is your job right now, if this is the situation you're in. This is big stuff, and it's worth taking it on as our current task. And if it seems so big that you're thinking, well, I don't really know if I can do this. I don't really know if I can give myself permission to want things or to believe that I can have what I want. I have great news for you. I can help you do this, or another coach can help you do this, right? I will tell you that it took me years of getting coached and being willing to coach myself and being willing to change a lot of beliefs that I held for decades in order for me to truly believe that it was okay for me to want anything, and in order for me to believe that it was okay for me to have what I wanted, right? And, I'm not saying that it's going to take you years to change your beliefs in any department of your life, but I am saying that actually believing that you can want things may seem impossible to you. And if that's where you are, I want you to know that number one, it's okay to be there. But number two, I want to assure you that it is actually not impossible to change your beliefs in this department. You will have to put effort into making this possible for yourself. You will have to put effort into changing your thinking, which can be surprisingly challenging at times, but I can help you do it. Or if not me, then there are other coaches out there who can help you do it. I promise you that effective help in this department is available to you if you are also willing to put in your own work. I've said this before on the podcast, but there's this great adage that holds, you have to do it all by yourself, but you can't do it all by yourself, right? We all need some help, and there are things that we can only do for ourselves. Okay. So the point, just to sum that first point up here, what I want you to know is, like, if you don't specifically know what you want, you may know that you want things to be different, but you don't know specifically what you want, or you do know what you want, but you don't believe you can have it. Your job right now is to contend with that, to contend with all of your beliefs about not being able to have what you want, or to clarify what you want and believe that you can have it. Now, closely related to that point, if you are clear on what you want, your job is to get really, 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 really clear on why you want it. Reasons are like rocket fuel. When we know why we want something, and when we like our reasons for wanting something, we are in a much better position to take the kinds of actions that will result in the changes we desire to make. Now, as what I've just said implies, our mindset is everything when it comes to making change. And the reason for this is that our thinking, or our thoughts, or our beliefs, our perceptions, our stories determine our feeling state. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've most likely heard me say this at least several times. Although we tend to think that our life circumstances determine our feelings, they do not. What we think about our circumstances determines our feelings. And this is so important because our feelings drive our actions. When we believe that a particular change is possible for us, we feel very differently than we do when we do not believe that a particular change is possible for us. When our story is something like, well, I really want things to be different, but there's no way that's possible, we are likely to feel discouraged or hopeless or apathetic or something along those lines. And we are not likely to take actions that will show us that change actually is possible for us when we are feeling those kinds of things. On the other hand, when we believe that change is possible for us, and when we know what we want and why we want it, we are likely to feel determined or courageous or energized or something along those lines. And when we feel those kinds of feelings, we are much more able to take the kinds of actions that will ultimately result in us successfully making the changes we want to make in our lives. I want to stress a few things about all of this. One is that sometimes people talk about mindset in terms of law of attraction type stuff. And while I hope I'm not oversimplifying here, the idea with the law of attraction, as I understand it, is that when you think in a particular way, you are more likely to attract the kinds of things and experiences that are in line with what you are thinking. And my take on this is that this is partially accurate, but it also leaves out some really important points. Namely, that many of the changes we want to make in our lives will require a lot of action on our parts. We may passively attract some things, or at least seem to passively attract some things, but I do not think that getting our mindset in order and then just sitting around and waiting for changes to magically occur simply because we're thinking the kinds of thoughts we want to think and feeling the kinds of feelings that come from thinking those thoughts is a great strategy for anything much. Okay. At the risk of opening a can of worms that I'm not going to be able to fully delve into right now, I will tell you that I am a believer in all sorts of things. For example, I fully believe that when we take responsibility for the things that we have the power to control in our lives, and develop a new relationship to all of the things we do not have the power to control, we open ourselves up to receiving all kinds of magical support. So, indeed, it may seem at times like when we get our mindset in order, kind of do passively attract things. And that, like whether or not that's factual isn't really the point. Here is the really key point. Whether we believe in magic, quote unquote, or anything else that's kind of woo woo, so to speak, or not, no matter what our spiritual beliefs are, no matter what we believe about energy or forms of unseen assistance, when we take radical responsibility for the things we have the power to control, we create our own magic. Or here's the awesome thing. If you don't like any of this magic talk, we can put it like this. When we take radical responsibility for the things we have the power to control in our lives, we don't need magic, right? We can look at this from both angles here. So to reiterate, mindset isn't everything. Action is important. Getting our mental house in order is not a substitute for taking action. Rather, it is the prerequisite for taking effective action. Now, when we talk about taking effective action, it's really important to point out that when we start off on a journey of change, we usually don't know exactly what we're going to have to do in order to get our desired results. And sometimes that seems like a problem. We think that if we don't know what we need to do, then we can't even get started. But what if it couldn't be any other way? If we want to go somewhere we've never been before, if we want to be someone we've never been before, if we want to do things we've never done before, we may have to venture into uncharted territory. There may not be a guidebook for where we're going. And so in order to make change, We need to believe that we are open to taking different kinds of actions to work towards our desired results. And we need to be willing to be tenacious about trying new approaches if the actions we take at first don't get us what we want right away. We need to believe that it's okay if we don't know exactly what's going to be effective, as long as we're willing to keep trying new approaches. We need to believe that if we keep attempting different things, we will eventually find the actions that are effective in making the changes that we desire. And it's really hard to do this if we don't know what we want and why we want it. Bringing us back to the first points I shared. It's really hard to hang in there when the going gets tough if you don't really believe that the changes you desire are possible for you or available to you. Now, let's talk about time and how long it takes for changes to transpire or to be achieved. So often, when we know we want change, we want it now and we rush to do something about it without taking the time to clarify what exactly we want and why exactly we want it, and without taking the time to address the limiting beliefs that may be getting in the way of taking the kinds of actions we need to take to make the changes we desire. And then when we act from this kind of disheveled state, our actions often aren't effective and we don't get the changes we desire. And we end up believing that change isn't possible for us. And then that belief creates feelings for us that drive our future actions. And we end up creating and recreating a reality that we don't like. And when we don't see our part in this, when we don't see how our thoughts are creating our feelings, which then drive our actions, which then have real consequences in our lives, we may think that we don't have the ability to make change or that change isn't within our control. Now, about control, here's the deal. There are a lot of things that we do not have direct control over. There are a lot of things that we may not have the power to change, at least not directly. But that doesn't have to be a problem. The problem is that many of us spend much more of our precious time and energy worrying about the things we cannot control instead of taking responsibility for the things we can control. And when we start to shift our focus to the things we can control, our lives can change dramatically. And this, learning how to do this, is in essence what my approach to coaching is all about. Getting clear on what we have the power to change and taking responsibility for that stuff and learning how to develop a different relationship to the things we don't have the power to change is what I teach people how to do. And it's life-changing. It might sound simple, and in a sense, it is really simple, but putting this stuff into practice and applying these ideas to our lives day in and day out does take willingness and it does take effort. But that is basically true of everything. Even being unhappy requires a certain amount of willingness and effort. Now, I really want to emphasize that there's nothing wrong if in the past you have tried to make changes and they haven't worked, so to speak. And you're listening to this episode and thinking, well, I understand all of this conceptually, but I don't know how to put this into use in my life. Here's what I want to say to that. If you haven't done it yet, of course you don't know. And what if that's okay? What if all you have to do at first is believe that you can learn new ways of thinking, believe that you can learn new ways of relating to your thoughts and feelings, and learn new ways of taking thoughtful action? So again, so often when we want change, we want it to happen within a particular time frame. And sometimes that time frame is like within the next 30 minutes. And when we're in that state of thinking, we may not be willing to slow down and simply be where we are at first. But as strange as it might sound, being willing to be where we are is the first step in making change. And what I mean by being where we are is accepting the facts of our current circumstances instead of resisting them or denying them, being willing to examine our beliefs so that we may eventually decide whether or not we want to change them, and being willing to feel our feelings instead of resisting them or avoiding them. When we're willing to practice doing these things, because this is a never-ending journey, it's not like we get good at these things and then we're done. It's a constant learning process. When we're willing to practice doing these things, we're able to make change more efficiently. And that does not always mean instantaneously, but it does mean that we're able to move forward in the direction of our desires instead of getting lost or defeated or sidetracked or stuck. When we resist our current state of being and resist our current life circumstances, it's a lot harder to move boldly in the direction of our dreams. And I think I'm kind of like quoting Thoreau, but maybe I'm not. But I want to give credit if credit is due there. Go boldly in the direction of your dreams. Live the life you've imagined. That's the quote I'm drawing from. So what this means, the point here is that there are times in the change-making process when we need to be willing to not take action. Maybe you've heard the expression, don't just do something, stand there. And I think there are many situations in life when this advice is very appropriate. The other thing about being willing to be present with ourselves, and again, what I mean is accepting the facts of our situation, examining our thinking, and tolerating our emotions, is that doing this enables us to take action in the service of our goals and the changes we want to make, even when it's really uncomfortable to do so. Most of the time, making big changes in our lives is excruciatingly uncomfortable, at least at some points within the journey. But when we accept that intellectually, and when we're willing to practice actually doing this, actually tolerating the discomfort to the best of our ability, we can keep going. We can continue to take action in service of the changes we want to make, even when it feels kind of terrible. But when we can't tolerate uncomfortable feelings, we may allow the discomfort to stop us in our tracks. And although that isn't inherently bad, it's certainly not morally bad. What it means is we may not get to make the changes we want to make. Okay, I want to sum all of this up by saying that so much more goes into making change than simply taking action. Taking action is important, but our thinking, our mental programming, and the feelings created by our thinking gives us the capacity to act or not act in particular ways. So when we want change, we've got to invest in taking a look at what we are thinking, and we've got to invest in learning how to deal with our emotions if we want to be able to take the kinds of actions that will ultimately result in us making the changes we desire and living the lives we want to live and being the people we want to be and having the kinds of relationships we want to have. So as you think about whatever you might like to change in 2022, keep all of this in mind. And if you want my help making changes in your life, let's work together. I specialize in helping people who are cheating on their partners to clarify what they want in their relationships and do the things that I've talked about today so that they can make the changes they want to make. If you are ready to talk, you can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. All right, everyone. Whether the turning of the calendar from one year to the next means a little to you or a lot to you, I wish you a good moment in time as we transition from 2021 to 2022. Thank you all so much for listening. I will see you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.